Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to our webinar. So, we're currently at 102 participants, and there's still people joining. First of all, we'd like to thank you for joining our webinar. We'd like to really thank you for your continued support for our ministry. And for this afternoon, we would be hearing from Judah Paulo and his wife Earl, together with Jose from RZIM, so Asia Pacific. So we're really thankful for their time that they've allotted for us to join this webinar and for us to learn from them for this talk. So without further ado, I'd hand over the floor to Judah. Judah, let's take it away.
All right. Thank you, Raymond. It is an honor and privilege to be with you and the yesHEis team and everyone else that's tuned in right now. And this is an interesting topic during, I guess, a very apt season that we find ourselves in. Very uncertain. The byword is unprecedented. We've never found ourselves in a situation like this. But we are familiar with what has happened to us throughout life, because life, what can I say, pain, distress, misery, it's inescapable. It seems like it's a part of it. It's kind of tied to it so closely that you can't escape it. When it comes to suffering, I just want to put it out in the forefront so we know what we're dealing with. It's basically a state wherein somebody experiences pain, distress, or hardship, may it be external or internal. External meaning some distress that's caused by some situation, adversity that you're facing, or some sort of tribulation that you're fighting through. But even though we somehow and somewhat go through it with an external foe, we are affected internally, and that's why there is agony and anguish and trauma, torment, torture, hurt, sadness, unhappiness, sorrow, grief, and then the list goes on, heartbreak and heartbrokenness. So we want to spend this time right now and really wrestle out some of the questions that are up in the air. I'm here with, of course, my wife, okay, Earl Beha Paula, and a good friend of mine. Can I say that, Joe? Is a good friend?
We'll stay alive if you say that. That's okay. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because, you know, I've known my wife for 11 years, Joe's for 6. So that's about 17 years of them suffering with me. So they can speak right into the subject. So we're just going to kick it right off. I'm the moderator. I'm like a, what can I say, a baseball player, a pitcher that throws it underhand so they could knock it out the park. All right, so here you go. First question, suffering. If I am suffering at this moment, is this some form of punishment? I'm gonna start easy.
Wow. That's a really easy question to answer, and maybe Earl should start answering that question, because the question, as you rightly put it, Judah, is that she's got 11 years of experience. So is that some kind of punishment for her? Maybe that's a good place to start. Earl, do you want to take a stab at that, or do you want me to take Judah's hit?
Your pleasure, Joe. Whatever you find fitting, go ahead. Either way, I'm good.
Yeah. You know, that's a very, very interesting question. Not because we ask it, but in as much as why we ask it. I mean, everybody asks the question of suffering, but if you think about it, the fact that we ask the question of why we suffer assumes that as human beings, we're not meant to suffer.
Mm.
That tells me that we think a certain way about ourselves. And then the way the question is framed, now, if I suffer, am I being punished for something? The assumption being that there is a way to live life, and that somehow has not happened, and there's someone out there, we could call that someone God, and this someone weighing the scales, as it were, in the way we've lived our lives, has found the way we live our lives wanting, and therefore a punishment is meted out. Now, I find the conclusion not necessarily to be true, but the observations are right. We seem to think that we are creatures who should not be suffering, and that observation is right only if we are created otherwise. And we seem to assume that there is a God who is deeply passionate about living right for us. And that again is something that makes sense only if we have, and I'm going to put it out there, a biblical worldview. You have a God who creates human beings to be a particular kind of creature. The Bible calls it created in his image, and he calls us to live life a certain way. So it's only if you grant that much, that there is a creator who created human beings in a particular, with a particular intent in mind, can we even raise that question. So I'm assuming that for all of us listening in, that assumption makes sense. Because if you don't grant that assumption, the question just falls apart. But if you grant that assumption, then I think we are stepping into some really hard truths to grapple with. Because we are asking things like, yes, I believe in God. Yes, I believe in a God who's good. And yes, I believe in this God who's promised to be good to me. But my experience doesn't quite measure up to what my expectations are. And then we begin to grapple with this, which is it possible that I am not the kind of person I should be? Is it possible that I'm not doing the kind of things that I should do? And if you follow down that track, it's only logical that you'll end up concluding that I must have sinned. I must have failed God. God must be teaching me a lesson. Right? He must be teaching me something so incredibly powerful and necessary that I have to learn it the hard way because I don't seem to be learning it any other way. If you ask the question, what lesson is God trying to teach us? I think you'll find a rather sobering truth. And I want both of you to jump in and see if you want to add to this. You see, it is true that we have sinned. It is true that we don't live the kind of life we are created to live. But what is the lesson God's teaching us? God is not somehow standing there and say, okay, you messed up. I'm going to make life even more difficult for you. But as we go through difficulty and we reach out to a God who not only intends to help us, but has reached out to help us, we begin to appreciate that we live in a world that is so thoroughly corrupted by human evil, our life included, that continuing to live in this life will be a struggle. In other words, what God is saying to us is that He cannot take us out of our suffering instantaneously. He cannot take us out of the suffering we go through without taking us out of life at the same time. So, is there hope? Now, I think the message of Jesus Christ is what actually gives us hope. Because if God were to take us out of suffering, uh, it would make no sense why we suffer in the first place. But see, he he doesn't take us out of suffering because he can't do that without taking life out of us in that sense. But he allows us the privilege of journeying with him, where the things that once brought pain are now going to be factored in for a life that is thoroughly enjoyable because of who he is, and he's what he draws us into. I mean, Judah, you can speak about this from a perspective of physical pain, the kind of pain you endure in training to be a boxer. I mean, could anyone train to be a boxer? I haven't, and I'm not intending to train to be one. But my question to you is, can anyone train to be a boxer without taking those blows, without
Indeed.
enduring that pain? So I think
No pain, no gain, as they say.
Oh, yeah, you're a mom. Giving birth is super painful.
there you go. I think all of us can appreciate this, but somehow we tend to assume that God should eradicate pain because
Yeah,
pain costs us too much. God
yeah,
does. The thing is, how does he do it? He doesn't eradicate pain and therefore eradicate our humanity, but he uses our pain in such a way that he could bring us to a place where humanity is truly beautiful and something
yeah.
good can come out of it. So that's what I would do in terms of just taking a first stab at the question that you raised, Judah. But I want to throw it back to you guys because both of you said that, from the perspective of being a mom, Earl said that,
Yeah,
and Judah, even from your own former life as a boxer.
Mhm.
Speak
yeah,
into it. What makes
yeah.
sense
Yes,
to
I, Thank you for that, Jules. Actually, when everybody asks suffering, automatically you get from that question, is there something wrong with that? And you already answered that beautifully, right? So just to make it real into our lives, when you say, why do we suffer? And there are two kinds of darkness. There are two kinds of suffering. There's suffering that you're observing externally, that you're just watching. But if you're at peace inside, you're okay. But there's also a darkness or suffering that's internal. Internal meaning to say you're feeling rejected, you're feeling abandoned, you're feeling like, I just couldn't do this and I don't see any future in my life right now. So you're suffering, whether it's caused right now, we're talking about, the title says COVID. Are you suffering because of a loss of a job? Are you suffering because you've been sick all your life? Are you suffering because of oppression? There's so many forms of suffering. And what I got from that is the reason why we ask why we suffer is because we long for something better. We long for a better place. Like internally, there's this sense of like, I don't want this, but I can't escape it. I remember the famous work of art in television for those women who's watching, the Princess Bride. Princess Bride says, Your Highness, life is suffering. If something else tells you other than that, they're selling something. But it's true, right? Like you cannot escape the reality of suffering. And when you understand that reality, it helps you then frame or have that perspective, which you set up very well, the biblical perspective. What is your perspective? Do you even have a moral framework to make sense of that suffering? Because we have to begin there. That's foundational. We have to, do I have the right framework to deal with suffering? Or am I still wondering, why should I even suffer? Why is humanity has to suffer? And Joyce have dealt with that beautifully. So I just want to put that out there, settle that framework. Is your framework going to answer all your questions to suffering?
There you go. And I guess this is addressed to people who are still wrestling out what narrative am I going to hinge my life to? Mm-hmm. And I think you presented it both well, that the Christian narrative or the gospel story mm-hmm. is something worth investigating. And I think in our own journey, in our own lives story, God found his way to open our eyes to this magnificent story that begins with Genesis 1:1 that God created. And in his creation, he's turning out all things together for good. Like there's this beautiful canopy where God is bringing it all together towards this incredible consummation that we can celebrate. Regardless of what we go through in this temporal time-space continuum, God is going to bring us into his warm embrace. And wonderful.
Sorry, you have a question. Do God punish me? I say that's a question, right? Yes. Am I being punished?
Are you being
I think punished? I missed that question. Am I being punished? And if you follow and subscribe to the Christian narrative, you see all the Old Testament that, yes, God can say, I will punish this nation and I will send all this plague. But now in the 21st century, when Jesus entered humanity and we have the perspective that that's done, as a Christian, I would say, I don't think it's accurate to say you're being punished because we cannot satisfy the wrath of God. That's already been done. And that's what Joe said. Like God the Father sent his son, Jesus Christ, to satisfy that wrath such that we will be free from that and have an opportunity to live a new life in him. So maybe not punish, but the question that we ask ourselves, what is God disciplining us? What does Joseph was saying, like, what are you becoming out of it? What is being exposed out of your character that is not according to what you subscribe? And if you do follow Jesus, is that something that is present to you? Like, what am I becoming because of this suffering? What is created in me? Because suffering can either turn you to stop believing or you start believing with fresh conviction. So either way, you have to settle.
Well, let me throw in a monkey wrench right there. And this is one of our points and the questions that was brought about prior to coming into this webinar. Okay, fine, I got it. I subscribe to the Christian narrative. I've given my life to Jesus Christ. I trust him fully. But why am I going through this season of lockdown, this season of being separated from my loved ones? Why COVID-19? Why am I suffering through this when my relationship, I'm going through, I'm doing everything I need to do. I'm checking out the boxes and I'm saying, look, I'm doing my personal devo. I'm writing my journal. I'm doing everything I can. My relationship is good with God. So why am I going through such suffering?
Very good.
Earl, as you were mentioning, towards the closing, uh, your closing statement there where, we come to God, we come to Him a certain way, we accept the worldview. And so we really can't call this as God punishing us. We can't really bear the wrath of God. But then this is something that He's disciplining us for. Now, I remember reading this from Donald Barnhouse. Is probably one of my favorite authors in terms of how he illustrates things. Now, this master illustrator, it is a true story about how he was walking back with his little girl, his daughter, having just finished the funeral service of their mother. Right? So this is a really difficult time. So you have this father-daughter uh, walking back from the funeral service to their car, and then the story is told that this little girl looks at her dad and asks her, if Jesus died for us, why did mommy have to die? And that is probably the most heart-wrenching of questions any father would want to hear from his little girl. If Jesus died for us, why did mommy have to die? Now the story goes that Barnhouse fumbles for a bit, not knowing how to answer the question, and then almost providentially, as it were, there was a truck that just drove past them, and the shadow of that truck was cast upon the sidewalk where Barnhouse and his daughter were walking, standing beside their car. And then he turned around and he asked asked the little girl the question. He says, he told her, honey, right now, if you were to be run over by something, would you rather be run over by the truck or its shadow?
Mm.
And the little one didn't miss a beat. She looked at him and she said, I would rather be run over by the shadow because it wouldn't hurt as much. Now, when God, in His benevolence, in His mercy, in His kindness, took on Himself the punishment due human sin, it was like the truck running over Him, so that what is cast upon us, all this pain that we are going through, pain, it makes suffering personal.
Yes.
That's what it does. Right? And you mentioned that, Earl, we can talk about pain in an objective sense. So when we're talking about pain in an objective sense, we need theory, we need good theory.
Yeah.
But when we talk about suffering, pain in a practical sense,
Yeah.
theory is good, but it's not good enough. We need to go from theory
Yeah.
to therapy.
Yeah.
We need somebody to not just something to be given to us or some information to be transferred to us. See, that's what happens with Jesus. That's what happens with Him taking upon Himself the weight of our sin and the punishment thereof. It's death.
Yeah.
He died for our sins so that what we go through now, and now I'm very sure if I say the phrase that I'm going to say, some of us will nod our heads in agreement, others of us will just shake our heads in disagreement. It's a phrase I'm borrowing from the Apostle Paul, which is in which he says, this light and momentary troubles we are going through.
We're on the same page. I was literally looking at that just to make sure if you missed the ball, I'm going to drop it, Jones. But thank you, Jones. You had it.
There you go.
That's teamwork.
Yes. Yeah.
What for him was light and momentary. He was beaten about 38 or 39 lashes, close to 4 times. He was shipwrecked a couple of times. He was beaten, thoroughly beaten, and left for dead on few occasions. He was hungry. He was literally on the streets. And he says there is light and momentary trouble.
Hmm.
Now, the only way we can grapple with that, and Earl, I'm sorry for pointing this back in your direction, it's like asking a mother who gives birth to a child
Mm-hmm.
if that pain was bearable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've failed the physical. I haven't given birth to a child, right? But just watching it, I know the pain is unbearable. But you see, just because it's unbearable does not mean it's undesirable.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
It is
Yeah.
truly the light and momentary trouble or pain we go through if we have a vision of what's going to come through
Yes.
that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
what I hope we will capture is not so much get bogged down, and these are important things. It is important for us to ask the question, where is God when we go through
Yes.
such struggles? It is important because we're not talking about a God who just designed the universe and kind of like a clockmaker wound up the clock and left. No, we're not talking about a God who's absent. We're talking about a God who's present, who's involved, and much more. We're talking about a God who loves. So these questions are really important. But for us to be able to appreciate what God is about, what He's doing, I think we need to not just look at what it is that we are going through, but why we are going through what we are going through. What
Mm.
is it set before us? That's the same thing that is said about Jesus in Hebrews chapter
Mhm.
12. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. I'm not suggesting that if you're a Christian, your pain and your struggles and your suffering just disappears like the early morning dew. No, it doesn't. In fact, the cloud gets darker and it descends even much more
Yes.
heavier. But there is joy that is set before us. So that's what I would say. And definitely, please add to it and see if you can
Yeah.
provide a.
I, I was really thinking when that question came, like, what if I've done everything? You said that,
Mhm.
right? And I'm reminded of the lament, the lament in Psalm 88. Like that didn't end
Mhm.
well. He said, darkness is my closest friend.
Mhm.
And this, it's not just one. So all of Psalms, there are actually, if I'm right, correct me, Joes, but there are two chapters of Psalms that didn't end well. One said in Psalm 39, turn away from me, God. Turn your face away from me until I die, right? And that Psalter was really, he can't bear the effect of his sin, and he thought that God is the source of his suffering. But I want to zoom into Psalm 88. The Psalm 88, he was in the treadmill of sorrow. He was actually He-Man or Haman. The He-Man is the chief seer of King Solomon. He's doing the right thing. He's worshiping.
Mhm.
If you read that chapter, he's saying like, why God? Why did you turn your face? How long will I wait for you? And he imagines like there's no hope for him. And he even went back to God and complained. And I think the 4 verses there talk about like, will somebody worship you when you're dead? Like, is actually quite sarcastic and irreverent. But what also showed us that we can come to God when we don't understand, when we feel this heaviness or sense of desperation and despair. Like that's God knows our humanity. He allows us that. But I want to bring back, not all the time our suffering ends well. I mean, what I'm saying is in this lifetime, that's what Joe's talk about, the perspective of eternity. That's the only reason we can move past it. But sometimes, our suffering is so real and getting harder and harder. I'll make it personal for you. Yesterday, a friend of mine just called me that she's about to go on a separation. And that broke my heart. They've been married for 20 plus years.
Mhm.
And my mother alone, my father survived a five times stroke. Sometimes I ask myself, like, my mom is a woman of prayer, a woman of God, serves, so kind. I have nothing against. I mean, like, yeah, we don't agree in certain things, but she lived a good life. No complaints. She lived a good life.
Wonderful.
And I don't understand in her. I was actually really thinking about this, like, because my auntie asked, like, what's up with your mother? Why is she suffering? Because people see you also, right? Like the friends of Job, like, why is she suffering?
Mhm.
And she could just be enjoying her life right now, traveling, but here she is, taking care of my dad, right? Selfishly, say, Mom, just go enjoy your retirement. But at that moment, it made me really deal with this question. What if I will never see my father get better? What if I will never see my mom enjoy the world that I know the same way I enjoy? And I really asked her, are you really okay as you go through this, right? Are you, because I felt she's suffering. Imagine she can't even visit me much and enjoy my children because she has to take care. So what I'm saying is sometimes our lament doesn't always end in praise. But Psalm 88 for He-Man, he doesn't know Jesus yet. That theology that he said, Lord, darkness is my closest friend, get away from me. He forgot that that's no longer the reality for us. Because Jesus' resurrected life has given us this new hope that yes, I may not see the freedom or the solution of this problem, but I know in eternity, when in the consummation, meaning when everything makes sense in front of my Maker, my tear will be wiped away. And when I settled that question, I really became free, and I felt like I had to do something, because there's guilt that also comes in, because when you're observing pain, you felt like it's also your fault, right? You felt like you have to do so much. So I'm just gonna put it there that sometimes you are in a treadmill of sorrow. Continue persevering in prayer until you battle it in victory. You just have to go through that, and don't even think like it has to be okay next year. How long will I do this? Because it's forming in you something that reflects the character of God that gives glory to his name. So
I once heard a wise evangelist say that we ought to live our Christian life from the future back. Are you familiar with that, Jose?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have a great victory in Christ, and we ought to come live our life in light of that. Now I just want to take the lens a little bit further back, though. Oh, would you like to share something?
Let me just say something from a very, very, very practical point, tying what Earl just said and what I said earlier. You see, the thing is that we all have expectations. It's only when the threshold of our expectations is breached that we lose courage, that we spiral, we go into this downward spiral from disappointment to depression. So here's the thing I want us to think about very, very carefully. Wrestle with it if you have to. You see, when our expectations meet reality, there will be a disconnect. And only the one who expects that there will be a disconnect will deal with disappointment well. And we have to grapple with this, because believing in God is not a quick fix. It's just to say that, I lift my hands and I say, I believe in you. It's not a quick fix. A psalm that comes to my mind, which brings both of this together, Earl, what you said just now and what I said earlier, is Psalm 27. Psalm 27 begins with saying, the Lord is my light and my salvation, of whom shall I be afraid? You go to, he says, one thing I desire, that I will seek, that I will dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. Behold the glory in his glory in his temple. That's his commitment. This is King David speaking. And then he goes on just immediately after that, and he says, hide your face not from me, O God. You have said, seek my face. Your face I have sought. Even my father and my mother have forsaken me. Please don't forsake me. It's literally like it's two different people talking about this. See, that's the thing about our expectation and reality. When our expectations runs into reality, we will have to have an expectation check.
yes.
And only the one who has that worked out, which is why, what I find amazing about Jesus Christ is that he does not offer us, here is the way to how you will fix what is wrong with you. He doesn't give us that. He says, come to me, all who are weak and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. That's where expectation meets reality, and we readjust our expectations in the light of the reality he paints for us. And I love what you've said, Earl, the fact that looking at life with the perspective of Christ with us offers us a very different paradigm of what to do with life as we grapple with these difficulties, as opposed to not having that paradigm and trying to fix it on your own. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to
No, actually, yeah, I love what you said. Half of our suffering is in the false expectation that because I'm a Christian, it shouldn't happen this way. Because as we move forward in this conversation, we say that that's part of life. That is where actually how we are formed into becoming into his image. That's the only way. And I'm not preempting this, but salvation came through suffering.
Sure. Absolutely.
Sanctification is being fulfilled in suffering. And that's the only way that I made sense in what I have been through with Judah and observing a lot of friends and family. I mean, he's suffering too because of me.
So you are each other's sanctifying agents.
Yes, and yes.
So no, I just wanted to take back, the lens on what we've already been sharing, because yes, we're looking at the external factor of things, of situations suddenly popping up on us that would cause such distress, and we've been sharing about how God has caused this incredible story through Jesus Christ and this narrative, but as we take it a little bit further back, not just about God's doing in his son, but what does this say about God's being? For instance, if God is all loving, all benevolent, all powerful, why doesn't he just cause suffering to end in a snap? Why even go through it? I think that was a question that was addressed to us, and now we want to also just be able to look into that so that we can see how this reveals more about God rather than just about what he's doing. But what does this tell us about God?
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure why the echo is, but yeah, it's a question that we have to grapple with, and we have to struggle with it deeper than we would normally give credit for an answer such as that. I mean, let me give you a 10,000 feet answer, and that's what I mentioned earlier. God cannot remove us from a life of suffering without removing us from life itself. He just can't do that. But what does that say about God? If you think about this, the way God offers us his hand of help, he doesn't thrust it upon us. He opens it out to us for us to receive. Because you see, you cannot truly help someone who does not want to be helped.
Yeah.
Now, think about that a little further. What does it tell you about the character of God? I believe it tells you that God is someone who will not simultaneously, I want you to think about both of these things. God is someone who will not compromise his love because he's a holy God, neither will he compromise his holiness because he's a loving, benevolent God. He is holy love. He is not a holy God who loves or a loving God who is holy. The Bible describes him as holy. The Bible describes him as love. They are, in as much as we are told God is light and we are told God is spirit, this is how God is described, which means a holy God, a God who is love, will not do anything that is unloving. Anything and everything that flows forth from God is an act of love. Simply, if he did not want us to suffer, which he does not, and if he put an end to human suffering, in other words, he intervened in human action every step of the way, causing us to freeze, then we are no longer human, are we? You see, God does not redeem us to then reduce us into robots. C.S. Lewis says this. I mean, I love Screwtape letters, and one of the conversations that the senior devil in that instance is having with the junior devil, he says this. One of the things we hate about the Father under or Father from below, that's how he describes God. He says is that he is reckless in that he wants people to love him. He doesn't want to manipulate them into following after him. He wants them to love him. He wants them to want him. That's how Lewis puts it. What does our continued suffering say about a God who is love? It tells us that God will not take from us our privilege of being human. But he empowers us that while we suffer, he gives us endurance. I mean, both Paul and James, they both allude to this. Paul would say that, you know, we rejoice in our suffering. This is Romans 5. Why? Because our suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, character, hope, and hope does not disappoint us, for God has poured His love into us. Now, James would say the same thing. In fact, he says you should count it pure joy when you go through trials of various kinds. Why? The same thing. But James comes through a slightly different conclusion than Paul does. While Paul looks back and says, you should not be shaken by your suffering because it is how God, in fact, think of this. C.S. Lewis uses the analogy of suffering as God's megaphone, where He shouts to us in our pain. I think of suffering as a conduit, a funnel, if you would like, where there's water pouring through and there's no way for you to catch it because you've got a bottle with the nozzle A thin, but you've got a funnel now. Mm-hmm. And you can direct all of the goodness that's pouring through into that life of yours. But the funnel somehow, instead of becoming a hindrance, is now becoming indispensable. It allows you that. So that's what Paul uses. But James goes on to say, you know what? If you actually looked at how this progresses, suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, character, hope. But he pushes it a little further and says, so that you will be perfect, lacking no good thing. You know, I'm a biologist, so a lot of my analogies come from biology. I don't know if you've seen a caterpillar become a cocoon.
Yes.
Right,
she's been seeing that for 11 years of marriage, I'm just saying.
And then a pupae become a butterfly.
Yes.
Now, what is very interesting is to observe how the pupae struggles through the cocoon. The caterpillar becomes a pupae very, very easily. It's eating its way into having a case around it. But when it is emerging from its cocoon, it's literally squeezing itself through it. Mm. I don't suggest you try this, but here's what happens if you try to set it free before its time.
Yes.
It will emerge as a deformed butterfly, incapable of the glory of flight. That's the picture James is painting for us. Suffering literally kind of squeezes us into a way of life where emerging through it, we take flight. God doesn't waste our pain.
Yes. Yes. That's so.
And let's not lose the joy of going through that, wondering if God will abandon us. He will not. He knows that we will emerge through this because He's designed it. He's taken our pain and He's literally made it a cocoon through which we can emerge and take flight for glory.
Yeah.
We could say suffering is the buffering for the soul block or for the marble block of your soul. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really like the question. Thank you for that question, whoever raised that question. And how did she frame it, or he frame it? Like, what's the character of God as being reflected because of the suffering? If that's close enough. And I was listening to Joe's, and I'm really pondering, like, yeah, we know that God is just. We know that God is sovereign. We know that God is loving. And as I'm just looking at right now where we are, going through the uncertainty of really still until now, we don't have a vaccine, right? But it got me into thinking about Habakkuk, because Habakkuk's right. Oftentimes when God does something and we don't like the ways of God, it's really that. We don't like the way how God allows or gives His answer or deals with His people. And so I'm present to, Habakkuk was saying, like, Lord, I could not believe you're making me watch all this social injustice, or you're making me watch people die. I have a colleague in a women's forum. She literally sees people die and lose lives and not be with family. And I was a journalist before, and I have experienced counting dead bodies. And I wasn't a Christian then, but now I'm thinking, like, if I observe that kind of suffering or death, or I'm going through myself because of whatever reason and purpose, I don't like how God does it. I would say that, like, why do I have to, like what Joe said, why do I have to go through a caterpillar? Can't I just be a butterfly right away? Can't I just be a person that I want right away? Why go through that? And it made me really understand the righteousness of God. Just to answer your question, what particular character? The righteousness of God, in a sense, I now understood the grace of God better because of that. Righteousness, his ways, the right ways. There's an absolute way of doing things. And he does it in such a way that me, my mere mortal, cannot get it, right? I cannot understand it. And the way Habakkuk went through it, I was reminded for the 3 chapters, only the 3 chapters, I said, Lord, I can't do this, but I will wait. I will watch what you're doing. I don't understand why you're allowing a wicked Babylonian oppress a lesser evil, the Judeans. It's like, why are you letting the wicked prosper? Why are you allowing bad people do all these bad things? And the same way, like, why are you allowing this COVID to hurt us or, put us in this position that jobs are lost and lives are lost as well? So I was thinking, like, that's unjust. But yes, if you do not understand the justice of God, you would say that's unjust, that's unfair. But if you understand that that is his way to save and redeem humanity, to show, to reveal his righteousness through justification in the cross, when that happened, then I understood his grace. And that's the only way I can come to him. I don't like his ways, but I will watch, I will wait. And that's why finally Habakkuk ended up with, even if there are no figs in the tree, there are no cattle in the pen, there's no food, there's nothing happening, but I will rejoice in you, Lord, because I understand that you are holding me up. I understand where you are bringing me. I understand what you are making me. And sometimes it's really not, it's hardest lesson for me. Things that happen to us is not personal sometimes. It is really to reflect the glory of God. I lost 2 babies. I had a miscarriage, and it doesn't, for me, like, why did I sin? Did I do this? Am I punished because of my mistakes in the youth? But if I will stick there, I will get depressed. If I will stay in the thinking that I'm punished because of my mistakes and the bad things I've done, I will never be able to move forward. But the gift of the righteousness of Jesus Christ, he made us righteous. He made it new in front of God because of that gift of justification. And that for me was really revealing of the righteousness of God, and I can really rejoice.
Absolutely. And you know what? It's okay to ask these questions.
Yes.
It's okay to ask God, don't you care?
Yes.
You will find those questions asked in scriptures. You'll find his disciples who were doing what Jesus asked them to do. They were going in the boat, they were going from one side of the lake to the other because Jesus said, let's go to the other side. They were exactly where, now after the cross and the resurrection, we could say, they were exactly where God wanted them to be, doing what God wanted them to be. In fact, they were very, very afraid of what was happening to them. They were fearful of their own life. Now, these are not kids running around on the streets. These are hardened fishermen. And if they had to be threatened by a windstorm, it had to be something severe. But you see, they were in that storm because they were obedient to God, not because they were disobedient. It's okay to ask.
Yes.
See, but the thing is this, the silence of God does not mean the absence of God. It does not mean the indifference of God. See, inasmuch as it is okay for us to ask God, don't you care? It is also important for us to listen to him when he speaks. And I think it's the coming together of these, because very often we ask, don't you care? We pour our hearts out to him, and then sometimes we take a pilot posture, and then we kind of walk away, having asked the question, not waiting and not lingering for the answer. We have to wait for him to speak to us. And you will see that irrespective of our fears or our inability to control the outcome the way we want, uh, while circumstances can put our faith to the test, it will never nullify the faithfulness of God.
Yeah.
So let's be bold in our asking, don't you care? But also let's be diligent in our waiting and say, speak, Lord.
Right.
Wow.
It's only when the two meet
Yes.
are we going to have both help and hope.
Mm.
That's what I think we desperately need at this time.
It's wonderful,
Not just
Joe.
not just crying out, but also a silent listening.
I love how
And
you put it, and somebody already put it on the chat thread. The silence of God does not mean the absence of God.
Mhm.
That was beautifully
Mhm.
put.
Mhm.
Now, the silence of the moderator doesn't mean the absence of another question. I have a question that was thrown in right now, and this is a bit more theological in bent. I think this is somebody who just wants to know, to what extent is God sovereign?
To what extent is God sovereign?
Yes.
To the extent of all things created.
Mm.
Mm.
He is sovereign over all things created. God, by definition, is the only entity that exists on his own. He is the only uncreated, self-existent being.
Mhm.
And therefore, his sovereignty extends over all things created. Everything else is contingent and caused.
Yeah.
So God is sovereign over all things created.
And I
So,
think he asked that because he wanted to know more of the extent over human responsibility. Like, what can we
Mhm.
do in our, how do we respond to all this?
I think the sovereignty of God,
Mm-hmm.
properly understood, is what makes human responsibility possible.
Mm.
Yeah.
There you
It's God creating us free, the gift of freedom, that allows us the privilege of choice.
Yes.
I mean, we've played this game several times. I mean, not a game, but we've done this many times. Where when I'm in the Philippines and you ask me, what would you like to do, and I said it's up to you. I mean, we've gone for sandwiches, we've gone for coffee. Sometimes we've just gone and sat and had a chat. Now, if you think about it, Judah, if I were to ask the question, so who chose for us to go and sit and have coffee instead of going and having, let's say, going for a long drive?
I would say my wife, who gave me a green pass to hang out with you.
Yeah, but you see, the fun part is while you make the choice, that choice is contingent on the privilege that I gave you to make the choice. Now, here's something that most of us will struggle to grapple with. I don't know if you realize this, but in a fascinating way, I am allowing myself to be bound by the choice you made.
Mhm.
You see, God takes human responsibility very, very seriously. It, it is unbelievable to consider that the creator of the universe will think that it's worth him investing his glory in humanity. And the way he does it is that he upholds humanity for us to be human. The cross should tell us that God takes human choice seriously.
Mhm.
Tell us that it is his sovereignty that makes our freedom possible. So the proper response. Now, a total aside, think about how grateful we are today when there's limited movement, there's lockdown in many places. I mean, we are all calling it different, we all given it different names and acronyms and all of that. Think
Mm.
how grateful we are when someone reaches out to go and help somebody else.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now think back to 3 months. Didn't we take these things for granted?
Yes.
Didn't we say that, well, that wasn't done well enough, that wasn't good enough, it should have been done better? Do you see what's happening? This limitation has forced us to appreciate what it truly means to be human, and at the heart of what we really appreciate is that we have freely exercised our choice to be benevolent to another. Not because there was some structure, not because there was some expectation. In fact, all expectations were thrown out of the window. Thinking about people in power and offices and so on and so forth and say they must do a better job. And yeah, but we know that that's not what we are appreciative of. What we're deeply appreciative of is the fact that we choose. That's why I think anybody who grapples with the cross appreciates the cross. God was not under any obligation to offer human beings a way out of their predicament. He did it on his own. He loved on his own. He gave on his own. He fulfilled what we couldn't on his own so that we can be what he's created us to be. I think God's sovereignty is what beautifully makes human freedom and responsibility possible.
Yeah.
So,
And that's
yeah.
no, I will just quickly say that when you were talking about that, I'm present to precisely why humanity is the crowning glory of his creation. We are indeed
Absolutely.
created in the image of God, the Imago Dei, that we can now choose to be like him. He's given that. Go
And
ahead, Jay.
Earl, something that's very close to your heart. If you pause, or if anyone paused and asked themselves the question, why does abuse bother me so much when
So
I'm
much.
not the victim? The only explanation for that is that something is lost in you.
Yes. Or taken away from you.
Absolutely. And the only way that makes sense is if we are created to be more than what we make ourselves out to be. That's the only explanation. Otherwise, why should any of us bother when we are not the victims? In fact, it actually saves us a lot of trouble if we don't interfere.
Yes.
Saves us a lot of heartache, at least.
Yeah. And along that, yeah, and along that conversation also comes about living in the will of God. And the harshest suffering that I think if you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, the harshest suffering or the ultimate suffering is being separated from God. And I'm present to that. Like, am I really living out my will? And I mean, am I living out my will or his will in my life?
You know, it's interesting you say that, Earl, and I think there is a segue from that, what you just mentioned, to anyone listening, irrespective whether you are a Christian or not, whether you believe in God at all, or whether you follow Jesus or not. There's a segue into that, and that is this: the deepest longing of a human being will be fully met only in the belonging of another.
Yes.
Now, which means that all of us, in some sense, it's almost like we have a homing device in us, pardon the biology again, but that's what helps migration of birds, and that's what helps animals go where they go and roam as freely as they do and come back to where they belong. There is a homing device in all of us that wants to lodge in and connect to the one we belong to. Now, if there is no ultimate reality of a personal God who draws us to himself, who gives us that privilege to belong, then life indeed is only suffering, and the only answer to life is get rid of life itself. And well, we might have a few laughs while we go along it, but there is no enduring purpose in life. But because it is true, and Jesus evidences that in not only the life he lived, but the death he died and the resurrection from the dead and his invitation for us to come to him. And that's again something beautiful which you find only in Jesus. Only Jesus invites anyone to come to him. Everybody else tells you to go do something about what you need to do with your life being in such a mess. Jesus is the only one who invites you to come to him. And that points back to this aspect. It is not about us fixing our mess. Truth be told, we cannot. But it is in us being open enough, trusting enough, vulnerable enough, dare I say, to the one who says, I know how to fix this.
Mhm.
I will fix it in such a way that you will find joy forever.
Yeah.
So I think that's an amazing thing to consider, that only in the God of the Bible, only in the Lord Jesus Christ is there even an invitation to belong, which I believe is the deepest longing of
Mhm.
every human heart.
Wonderfully put. Now you've already painted the picture that pain, suffering, distress it's inescapable in this world. A question came in: can we conclude that life on Earth should be taken with expectation that it will be full of suffering? If so, is it selfish to bring a child on Earth, or to bring a child into this world?
Is it
Earl,
so?
you,
Is
you
it?
more than I do. So you have more experience at this than I.
Yeah, no, because I want to understand where she really wants, she's coming from.
Like, why would we even bring a child into this world if she would be facing all sorts of
Of suffering.
pain and suffering? Like, what's the purpose of
Yeah,
it all?
I
Is
feel
that
you.
selfish?
I feel you. I feel the fear, the threat, because when you.
And this is actually coming. This is very personal. This is coming from a person who's newly married.
Yeah, and it's a very. I understand your position right now, and not just for you, but for your husband, right? Like in your right mind, if you just follow logically, if life is suffering and everything is uncertain and everything around me is falling apart, why would I even bring life here?
Mm.
I think that's well framed enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many ways to approach this question, but I'll try. First question, you ask that question, I want to know if you are a believer of the person of Jesus Christ. Because if you're a believer of the person of Jesus Christ, you would begin to ask, like, why do I even want to do that? Is that just my will based from my fear? Or do you have the perspective of what does God want? Because there's so many levels in that question, because you can talk about Christian ethics, you can talk about who are you to decide about who to bring into this life. Number one, you can't make life. You can't. It's given to you. It's a gift from God. Like I've lost children. I mean, in my womb, and I've seen people who have lost their children in their adult years, or they've been wanting to have a child. And that concern is real, though. If I'm like just thinking, yeah, of course, right? It may seem selfish, because the reason behind that, as a mother, you're nurturing enough because you want to protect the child from the possible pain and suffering. I think that's already established. So to bring you to a conclusion as you struggle this question, I think I would like to direct you to ask yourself the question between you and your husband: am I living my life according to the will of God, or according to how I see my life, how I should live? Because that would level the ground for you. Like, is it really just my will? I understand the fear, the concern. If you're in business, you can see the viability. There's no proper return. The entrance, the strategy is very near. Like, you can't think of it. Like, you compute everything. It's just so difficult. But again, as a follower of Christ, that's not our standard. We don't live life and act based on how circumstances are happening. And that's why in Habakkuk, he said, when God said, the righteous live by faith. And if you are walking in the path of righteousness, the way of God, you are to live by faith. If God wants to bless you with a child, embrace it. It's a gift. He too has called that child for a reason and purpose in this earth. And our job as parents or a mother is to raise them such that they will be found fitting in the kingdom. For you to bring your fear in the forefront already will nullify you in the perspective of what is God doing in your marriage? What is God doing in your life? And my friend, I understand you, but imagine you are going to be a bearer of life. And even if, I actually remember the movie, right? There's one child alone that was saved from all the I don't know what's happening. Everybody was dying. Only a child was spared. And what if there's a specific reason and purpose that the child that God wants to bless you with, you can't go against that. You can't intervene that. And I think my invitation to you is like, Do you trust God? Do you trust God that He will take care of you and your husband? Do you trust God that He will give you enough strength to carry this? And above all, I pray and I encourage you to get a bigger perspective, rather beyond your circumstances. History will continue on. Until God says so, history will continue on. COVID will disappear. Probably they'll find a way to treat this, or maybe another war will come in. But the church or the followers of Jesus has to continue until we're called back to Him. And at this moment, we cannot suspend our plans that are consistent to the plan of the kingdom. You cannot just stop that. Our heart will always be, Lord, what? That's why the prayer, our Father who art in heaven, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Let that be the focus of your thinking and your reasoning behind why you want to have a child or why not to have a child. Yes, so I hope that provided something for you to consider.
Well put, Earl. Well put. I will only add a quick footnote to what Earl has just said. And I'm a father of two. I've got a 14-year-old and 11-year-old. And I can tell you this, if there's one thing that can literally remodel your life from being self-centric to other-centric, from being focused on yourself to being focused on others, is your life that you pour out into your kids.
Yes.
So here's something that you will begin to see. Now, it's not a decision or a question I'd like to take lightly. It's something that you have to think through very, very carefully. I've got some very good friends who have made the decision that they will not have kids for the many reasons that Earl just pointed out, and they find that it is both morally and socially responsible to not do that. I have several other friends of mine who are not in a position to have children because of some physical limitation and so on and so forth. Uh, irrespective whether you eventually choose to have or you don't have children, I would say get to a place where you'll be able to engage with them, because apart from them compelling you to become other-centric more than focused on self, they have this unique ability to bring you to what I would call foundations of what is true, what is genuine, what is real. That's the one thing that you cannot run away from a kid. You cannot run away from the question, but why? Can't. Now, if you think about it, the more you appreciate that question, the more you begin to realize it's because there is a disconnect between the grand picture you're painting and the ground realities of that picture painted, that the question is, but why? But why? But why? So, yeah, those would be two very, very simple. I think Earl has dealt magnificently with the whole picture painted from the perspective of a life that is devoted to living it on God's terms. And I want to push that a little further down. I'm saying this is something that is literally life-shaping and life-changing for anybody, irrespective of your worldview, your belief system, and your faith system, and so on and so forth. But it will be beautifully life-shaping if you begin to see how children are a gift from God. And that's how Psalm 121 puts it, that children are a gift from God. Not something we want to take lightly, not something we want to be flippant about, something that has to be really carefully thought through, but yes, it is something that will make us better and not worse off because of that. Thank you, whoever this is. Thank you so much for asking that question.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I'd love to put a personal touch to this. You know, I have two daughters and a boy. You know, our first child is a girl, second a girl, last is a boy.
Microphone a bit more, please.
Yeah, so I had we have two girls and a boy, and I called it what do you call it? Sanctification, and vindication. But another story. But you know, the reason why it was a blessing, because we were planning to have children, and when God blessed us with Colin, our last child, and it was a boy, it was so parallel to my own life's journey with my own family. So I came from a broken family. Mom and dad split up at a young age. My siblings, my two older sisters and me being the youngest boy, we didn't have that opportunity to have the so-called, normal family setup. But when God blessed me with Colin, a son, with two older daughters, it reminded me of something that I made, or kind of a redemptive factor to my own journey and story, when I look at it. So, I mean, for me, children are definitely a blessing. And for me, it struck me at the core, where God is amazingly just a grand weaver, as one dear friend of ours had said. And the way he weaves our stories together, it's beautiful. And that's why I could, just rely on him.
And yes, and just for our friend who asked that question, I'm actually present that for you to even think that question, that means you have that innate capacity to care and love, because you just don't want to have that somebody to bring this into this world. But yes, I think we have already outlined, for you to direct and think it through. And I'm excited for you, actually. So please tell us if you do decide, and if you do have.
If you have a boy, Judah's a nice name, or Joe's. Judah Jones, or any J. Jesus.
Well, Earl is a male's name, so.
Okay, but anyway, so going back to the final point that was given to us now, this incredible gospel narrative, the person of Jesus Christ, how do we share this to people who don't know of them, or know of Jesus Christ or the gospel, who is suffering, who maybe even who even has COVID-19? How do we share with them, who is going through somewhat of an unloving situation, about a loving God? So how do we share that?
So I'm pretty sure that this is not a question just from one person. The way the question is framed, I'm certain there's quite a few people who are asking this question and grappling with it. Let me suggest this. One of the things I begin to appreciate as being an evangelist and an apologist is love is the greatest apologetic.
Very.
What I say is true will be tested as true by what I do. And it takes a while for that to sink in. But think about it. What I say is true will be tested as true by what I do. Jesus demonstrated God's love for the disciples before he commanded them to love as he loved them. He spoke about love in the context of love being demonstrated. How do we speak about a God who is love in a situation which is as challenging as COVID-19? I think love paves the way. Love paves the way for the conversations we have. So it's a simple question that we can ask ourselves this: what is, let's say we're going through this, and take COVID-19 itself, what's the practical thing to do? I was preaching on Sunday, and as part of what I was doing, I was preaching on a particular topic, and I was also reading through multiple magazines, and one of the magazines I was reading through was a whole collection of, it was an online thing, whole collection of advice on how to navigate the COVID-19 situation. Okay, that was it was a Bloomberg public post, right? So advice on how to navigate the COVID-19 situation. You know what the first advice was? I want you to think about this. Cash is crucial. Whatever money you have, learn to keep it and use it well. Cash is crucial. Whatever money you have, learn to literally hold it. And then there's a whole series, but this is written not for an individual, it is written for organizations. It says basically how to help businesses tide over and so on and so forth. Then there's a whole host of course, it's got a US slant to it, because it talks about tapping into federal funds, and it talks about reaching out to the governors and looking at state funds, and even reaching out to banks and saying, could you give us a deferred payment so we don't have to make these payments now? We're better able to manage cash flow. It goes on to talking to small and medium-sized businesses, saying, listen, there are fixed expenses that you have, let's say rent, for example. Speak to your the person you're renting your apartment or your unit from and see if you can bring down the rent. Then there are variable expenses that you can have. Make sure you try to put a ceiling on variable expenses, which means if you have to pay someone, see if you can defer that, and so on and so forth. Basically, keep the money you have to yourself, because we don't know how long this is going to last. Great advice. But what's the worldview that underlies that advice? Not the worldview that underlies that advice. I mean, it's a very pragmatic thing to do. You and I know that, right? But think a little longer for me on this. What's the worldview that underlies that advice? It simply says, you are more important than someone else who's going through the same crisis that you are going through. Your needs are more important than the needs of someone else who's going through this. I mean, there's no one on planet Earth who's not being affected by COVID-19. Our thresholds are different, granted, but this is something that has impacted all of us.
Yeah.
So we are saying, you're valuable to me only if I can get something from you. God does not do that to us. He changes the language that we speak with from a language of self-preservation to a language of selfless love. He turns the tables literally on a self-seeking, self-centered world, and he says a better way to live and flourish is to be self-giving. That's why I love what John would say or rather what Jesus would say in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave. If he just stopped there, we'll begin to see that our first steps in having this conversation meaningfully with anyone is to be willing to maintain a posture of being self-giving. Now, it is true that we are all differently abled, and therefore the extent to which we can give of ourselves is going to be different. That's okay. I'm not talking about what it is that we are giving, but I'm talking about, do we even want to give? If we do, like the old adage goes, don't tell me how much you know till you till you show me how much you care.
Yes.
That holds true. So the first thing I would say is, check your heart's condition and ask yourself, do I have a posture that seeks the good of the other person, or do I have information that I want to disseminate? One of the challenges we are facing today, and I'm glad we are facing it, is that it's giving us a unique opportunity. You see, when God dealt with the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That which was abstract became tangible and proximate. Now, when we want to communicate, we take that which is tangible and proximate and we make it abstract. And we simply say, agree with what I have to say, or then I don't have anything else to do with you. I think we need to build a different kind of a bridge that demonstrates love.
Yes.
And when love is demonstrated, trust is given. And when trust is given, the people we speak to will be able to see who we are speaking about because of what we do. They will not only hear what we speak about, but they will see who we are speaking about. And I think that's at the heart of 1 Peter 3:15, something that is a verse that every apologist goes to like the drop of a hat, right? Set apart Christ as Lord over your hearts and always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that is in you, and do this with gentleness and respect. Count the other better than yourself is Paul's language to the Philippian church. That simply means count them deserving of something better than you choose for yourself. So that's what I would say. I know there are quite a few ideas floated out there, but I see it more as a trajectory than a 3-point program.
Yes.
We are journeying with these people together, where we are saying to anyone who does not know Jesus, let us show you what being loved by Jesus looks like, and then let us introduce you to Jesus so you can stop being loved through this surrogate me, but you can start being loved by Jesus himself. And then you can become the object of his love and affection and the source of that love to another. The gift goes on if that's what we do. I think that's a great question. It's a really great question to engage with.
Wonderful. Here, so we have about 10 more minutes to answer maybe hopefully one or two questions, but here's a very practical one for you guys. While we are going through tough times, what should our eyes be fixed on? I mean, how do we fix our focus on the unseen? So big how question, how do we do this? How do we live out the Christian so-called life?
Perspective.
Okay. Really give a short answer, but I'm going to wait for Earl to kind of take a stab at that. If Earl, you do that, Judah. I've seen you do this multiple times.
No, I'm the moderator. I'm here to serve you up. Later, I'll close it. I'll slam dunk it.
You guys are funny. Yeah. Let me ask that question.
Yeah. How do we focus on the unseen? What are some practical things that we can do to walk out this Christian life?
Yeah, I want to hinge back to what I shared earlier about the righteousness of God is shown in our faith. From faith to faith, his righteousness is revealed. So how do I do that? I cannot see God. I can only know his promise. And that is really by, how do you get to know him? It's really by diving into the scripture. There's really no other way. The more you devote yourself in study, in prayer, in just really get to know this, it is shaping you already. That's the one that's living it out already. It's like, that's your lifeline. So your question is, how can I fix? Where should I fix myself? Fix yourself in the word of God, because that is your practice. I mean, it's in Psalm 119, I believe that obedience to your word is my practice. And that's how we grow into his image. You know, I like what Joe said earlier about the effect of COVID-19 in terms of what is being shown as in the character of God. Like, we are exposed to our self-sufficiency, and there's really end to it. And I think we have already seen it, that we need someone and we need something, and that someone is in the person of Jesus Christ. And how do we really grow in that knowledge is really by really getting to know him in that intimacy. That's what we aspire for. In fact, that's what suffering provides. Suffering provides for those who doesn't know him, to draw him to get, why should I need you? But for people who are already walking with God, it makes you more and more hungry and thirsty to be in his presence. And that's what it's for us. Because the more I have that desire, my longing has shifted. That desire has shifted to just be in him and with him. I am now focused to know step by step, am I walking in step with your will? How am I to respond to this persecution, or people saying bad things about me, or me not having the enough resources to deal what I need to deal with? But if my mind, and I think some of you have heard in a women's forum, we've been championing sound mind. If our mind is redeemed, by the word of God, because we have received the gift of salvation, we can then begin to see what is of God. And when we can begin to see what is of God, that's what we fix our mind on. That's why in Colossians says, fix your eyes on what is above, not what is of the earth, because this earth is fleeting. It's shifting sand. It's gonna make you really depressed. Just look at your neighbor. Oh, my neighbor's doing more better than I have. You get crazy, right? Or why do they have this? Or, but if you fix your eyes on what is above and fix your eyes on eternity, what is yet to come, all other things will stand pale. You will have the courage. You will have the wisdom. You will have the perseverance that we are all called to live by faith as we live and walk into the future. That's the one drawing us close to. Like, we're living that future. And I want to be united with God, because if I will just shift my focus, actually, we just talked about this over the weekend. Like, we have to live a life with singularity of purpose.
Intense singularity.
Intense, but for him. For me, a singularity of focus and purpose. And we invite you to take that on. Like, that focus is just remaining in his presence. That when you come face to face, he would really say, well done, good and faithful servant. That's the divine accolade that everybody's asking for. Like, Lord, when I see you, will you say, well done? Or you will say, I don't know, you get out from me, even if you've done many great things. And that's the beauty. So I would say, suffering is a song of a fallen humanity. But for those who believe in Christ, or for Christians, it is an anthem towards glory. And fix your eyes on that. We are formed for his glory, and walk in that path.
Earl, it's amazing you say that, because if you think about the implications of that, what does it look like, right? What does it look like if I'm fixing my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith? What would it look like? You'll immediately begin to see that you develop a passion to love the one next to you. The singularity of focus in following Jesus is always translated in tangible ways in love for the other. And so we don't have to really wonder if we are actually, if in that sense, if we are committed to following Jesus and if we're actually doing it. You see, the closer you draw to God, the closer you will find being drawn to your neighbor to love them. Jesus demands that of us, as our love for him is always demonstrated in our love for our neighbor. So I love the way you put it, Earl, and I think the way we can validate whether that is the case or not is not so much in locking ourselves up in a room and not wondering about or worrying about what's happening around us, but plunging ourselves into the world around us and being Jesus' hands and feet. That's exactly what he said to his disciples when he sent them out. He said, as the Father sent me, so I send you. What happens to us as we draw closer to Jesus is that we will have this strange and inexplicable love for the other for their sake. So yeah, I just wanted to add that in as a closing note on that question. But great question, and thanks for saying what you said, Earl. Thank you.
Wonderful. I think that's it. It's 6:27, but I ended off with this one thing I had thought about, or I believe I read in one of Dr. Ravi's writings. Are you there?
Yes, and I think that's the thing I wanted to say is because I've seen you do that. I've seen you multiple times choose to do something that is actually for the good of the other person, even if it's inconvenient to you, which is why I said you can have the first step in answering that question. So yeah, it is something that can be demonstrated and will be perceived. So thank you for that, Judah. And you were going to say, sorry for butting in, but
it's okay.
Yeah.
You and Earl are really good at stabbing at me.
No. I told him I don't need to do it. I can moderate, but then here.
I just want to end it off with this. When Fyodor Dostoevsky, Russian writer, was looking at a painting of Jesus, he was looking at this picture of Jesus being taken off the cross, and he said this: I don't know the answer to the problem of evil, but I do know love. And I think when we fix our eyes on Jesus, the finisher and perfecter of our faith, when we look at the cross, it provides for us a God-entranced vision of all things, which then draws us with what we mentioned earlier, and which I quoted Joe's, enables us to live a life from the future back. We are called as Christians to have an eschatological perspective in life, to transcend beyond this momentary moment of affliction, to see that eternal weight of glory that awaits us. So with everyone who's watching right now, with all the answers that has been provided by Earl and Joe's, we just hope and pray and trust that you follow where the evidence leads, and it leads to the cross, an empty tomb, and a risen King.